Welcome to the Hollis Chapman Show, where we celebrate the power of words and the beauty of storytelling. Join us on this journey as we delve into the minds of successful authors and small business owners who have mastered the art of crafting captivating narratives that inspire, educate, and entertain. Prepare to be inspired as we explore the boundless possibilities that come from sharing stories and experiences that shape our lives and ignite our passions. Through heartfelt conversations and insightful discussions, we uncover the wisdom and creativity that fuel these incredible individuals in their pursuit of greatness. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let the magic of storytelling transport you to new worlds and perspectives. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and uplifted as we embark on this storytelling journey together. Stay tuned for an episode filled with wisdom, inspiration, and the power of words. Welcome to the Hollis Chapman Show, where stories come alive. Let's begin this adventure together. Don't miss out on the opportunity to connect with some of the most talented and compelling voices in literature today. Tune in and let the journey begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Hollis. Hey, I'm very excited to have this guest on today. You know, you're working real hard. You're doing well selling books. Your business is growing real well. So on the outside, boy, it looks like you're doing very well. But when you go home, you're exhausted. You're tired. You know, you built a successful company, but feel like too much still depends on you. You know, you wrote a book and you're doing great things, but too much depends on you going out there and doing podcast show tours and doing book signings and doing all this kind of stuff. And the only reason why you keep on doing it, because you have a passion for what you got to do. Our guest today is going to talk to us about that. Going to talk to us and tell us how we can kind of get over that hump. You know, you want your team to run with real ownership without you in the middle of every decision, right? You know, make that decision. But you got to teach. You got to hire the right people. Then you got to teach that. Then you got to delegate that. Without further ado, let's talk about our guest. You know, our guest is an author, executive coach, speaker, founder of Clearfield Leadership. Let's welcome to the show our special guest, Chris Clearfield.
You today.
Hey, thank you, sir. Appreciate you. And trust me, we need you today. We need what you got to say today. We need your book. So tell us more about yourself and your new book, sir.
Well, I will absolutely do that, Hollis. But I mean that entry into this conversation was so strong. I'm so curious. Like, what makes you say that? What makes you say that kind of we need this today, or we need this shift, we need this different way of thinking?
Well, I get to the point sometimes I'm doing things a lot. I'm busy. It looks on the outside like, hey, things are going pretty well. Understand, I'm exhausted. I need to sit there and delegate some stuff and do this and that. You know, I don't want phone calls, late at night because they should be doing it by themselves. You know, that's going to lead me to another question about AI and robotics later on. I'm not going to do it now, but I think the term of that will come into play because a lot of people, a lot of owners are sitting there saying, what am I going to do? This is, I want my own business, but this is exhausting me. This is, I can't go on vacation. I can't do this because I got to be there. But things will be changing, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, no entrepreneur that I know, they started their business because they wanted to bring their laptop with them on vacation, right? Or they wanted downtime to be synonymous with doing email. I think I really do think we're at this moment where, as entrepreneurs, we can recognize that the thing we really want is, the reason we started our business is for financial reasons, but also for lifestyle reasons, right? For, to be, or if you're like me, because you really couldn't, you can't work for somebody else, right? Because you're not, there's something about your personality that caused you to step off the beaten path and start a business and become an entrepreneur. And that's amazing. But so many entrepreneurs, even when they get successful, they find that they're farther away from that vision of entrepreneurial freedom, that vision of control over their own schedule, control over their own calendar, than they were when they started.
Yeah, very true. I'm going to give the listeners a little bit more about you. You are a former Wall Street trader turned leadership strategist. Okay, so what was a wow moment when you said, hey, I got to transition out of this and do this? Tell us a little bit about that. And then tell us, because you work with some great ones, leaders of Netflix, leaders of Microsoft, leaders of XC, leaders of ExxonMobil. So you've got some great people you work with. I want you to go back to, after you tell us about the Wall Street transition, that first sit down with maybe a Netflix. How did you feel? How did Chris feel? How nervous were you, or how you walked in there saying, I'm going to nail this? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, okay, so I was always a science geek. I studied physics and biochem and neuroscience as an undergrad, and I thought that I was going to go to graduate school and get a PhD, and that was going to be my path. And I came very close to that being my path, but I just really randomly got an opportunity to join a trading firm on Wall Street. I went through the interview process. The interview was interesting, and I was already admitted to a graduate school. So I thought, hey, I'll try this out and see what this is like. And I ended up working at that job for 7 years, and I worked through the financial crisis. So I had this front row seat to the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. And that experience made me get really interested in how different organizations made decisions and how leaders created culture within organizations to be able to make decisions about, very complex things, either well or not so well. And I think we saw a real spread of that in the financial crisis. And, there's one way in which I look at my path and I'm like, man, going from, studying a bunch of physics as an undergrad to being a leadership coach, physicists, we're not known for our soft skills, right? So it seems like there's some, that's kind of diametrically opposed. But I always had an interest in organizations. Both my dad was a sociologist, and so I always was interested in organizations and how institutions make decisions. And when the BP had their big oil spill in 2010, and the Gulf oil disaster, I remember kind of having this thought at that moment that like, the greatest environmentalist of the 21st century could have been an oil engineer or a manager on that rig who had, taken the steps to prevent that accident from happening. And that just got me really interested in, or kind of made me recognize that what I was interested in terms of decision-making was a much bigger picture than just my little corner of the world on Wall Street. So, in 2013, and Hollis, I also realized that I wasn't in a place where I felt like there were a lot of opportunities for me to grow as a person through that job. And I also at that time didn't really know how to take responsibility for my own growth. So, or at least within the kind of employment framework that I was in. So I decided to make a change. I went and I started my own company, really not having any sense of what I was doing. Fast forward a couple of years, I wrote a book called Meltdown, co-wrote with a friend of mine who is a sociologist. And then that led to some of the opportunities that you mentioned. And I'm kind of happy to talk more about those. But yeah, that was the sort of transition away from Wall Street to really like thinking about organizations. And then the next transition was really one to like thinking about leaders and leadership.
Leaders and leadership. Help us and give us some tips on how because you're out there by yourself a little bit. You wrote a book with a friend, great things. How does Chris hire the people? Do you think in the back of your head, without maybe telling them that, okay, I want to hire you and eventually I want you to do a lot of this, this, and this? Or how do you hire where in the future you can step back and let the people you hire do the business? Is there a certain technique?
Yeah, I love that question. And we actually think a lot about hiring, and a lot about hiring well, and a lot about partnering, and a lot about partnering well. And I think the thing that I think about hiring is, when you're like, leadership starts in the hiring process. So when you're leading somebody, the way I see, you mentioned a little bit delegation, we're talking about hiring. The word that I use is empowerment. How do you empower people? And I think what you do to empower people is you give them a rich context. You help them really understand both everything from the big picture, the background, what's happening in the market, all the way down to and here's the task that